Okay. Marvin Wolf, that guy over there. He's the author of 18 books?
Well, 18 under my name and 5 ghostwritten.
Okay. And we won't talk about those.
No.
Okay. All right. Marvin has had an amazing checkered life. I mean, you couldn't write a life as amazing as his.
Oh, but I have.
But he has, of course. And he's made money from it as well. But he's gone from being a paper boy, which wasn't recent,
No.
to being a multi-decorated war hero, including the Purple Heart. And that was not from running away and getting shot in the butt. Yes, he deserves every bit of that. And he's written some very iconic biographies, and then he's gone into being a rabbinical mystery writer. So it's like, I don't know how you even make up stuff like that. He is a charter member of IWASP. We have one founding member in the audience, Laura Myers, one of the founding members, these many years ago. And Marvin is a charter member. And what is the difference? What is a charter member?
Charter member is a person who joined at the very beginning of the organization. On the very first night of this organization, we met at the Los Angeles Press Club, the old press club, which is no longer there, on Vermont Avenue. And there were, to my recollection, somewhere north of 150 writers present. And each of us had received a postcard from Laura and her committee saying stuff like, we need a writers organization. If you want to know more about it, here's why. If you want to know more about this, come to this organization. And then come to this organizational meeting. And each of the founders got up in turn and talked about why we needed this organization. And then somebody said, if you want to join tonight, it's $25. Of course, we had to pay more later when we had a formal setup. So I was member number 26. I don't know what your member number was, but I was 26.
Got to be number one, right? Yeah. Okay, number one. Number one. Yeah.
Maybe three.
Maybe 3.
Depending on how you shuffled the check.
Yeah. 1, 3, same thing. So we've got history in the room, tons of it. Marvin is a renowned polymath. You'll have to look that up. I just learned the word myself. His daughter Tommy is in the audience right there. Hi, Tommy. Yes. And since you are moving to North Carolina, I thought it only appropriate to present you with this corncob pipe. And I want you to read one warning. I want you to read out loud in red right there.
Keep away from open flame. I have to tell you, this is not my first corncob pipe. It was a period in my life when I thought I was MacArthur.
Okay, so we'll get into therapy a little later. All right. Okay. So now we're gonna. This debate is not going to be about personalities and nasty. It's going to be about the issues. Okay. So, Marvin, you just talked about collaborations, and I know you've done. Ghostwriting is a kind of collaboration. You've done quite a bit of collaborating. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that process. How you choose a collaborator, how you get along with a collaborator, how you get along legally with a collaborator, how you keep things from getting crazy, all those things.
Well, last things first, sometimes they just get crazy. In truth, I haven't gone looking for any collaborators. They've come looking for me. In every case, a different person with a different story has hunted me up and offered me a chance to tell their life story. And most of the time I say no thanks. In terms of the actual writing, it turns out that I have a gift. And now we have to go back 100 years, more than 100 years. I wasn't around. My father's father, my grandfather, Morris, who grew up in Romania, according to family lore, I have no documents on this, so this could all be a Bubbermancer, an old wives' tale.
Look it up.
At the age of 9, he was orphaned in a pogrom in Bucharest and went to live with some relatives in Cape Town, South Africa. And as he entered his teen years, it developed that he had an ear for language, and he could speak, not read, but speak fluently, with some degree of fluency, 7 or 8 languages, a bunch of European languages, and Bantu and Swahili, which are 2 important languages in that part of the world. And he went to work as a teenager in a diamond mine about 300 miles from Cape Town as an interpreter. I have to tell you, this is a story that my mother told, not my father, although it's about my father's family. And when you're out in a diamond mine, you're a very remote location, and when you don't get to leave very often, and when you do, you're searched. Everybody is searched, even the managing director. Everybody's searched, because they're little tiny things and they're very valuable. So it came to pass at some time shortly after he arrived in this mining camp that the camp dentist sent for him, and he said, "How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 19. He said, "Well, you need to have your wisdom teeth out. If you have an impacted molar back out here, you could die before we get you to a hospital." So he pulled his 4 wisdom teeth and then went back for a follow-up visit a couple of weeks later, and the dentist took out a little box, and in the box were 2 of his 4 teeth, the rear molars, lower molars, that had been, the roots had been ground off. And he said, "Would you like to make some money?" And the scheme was, if you put those molars back in your mouth, there's a little space underneath it big enough to put a few diamonds in. So for some time, weeks or months, I don't know, whenever he went back to Cape Town, he carried those diamonds and then later would meet up with the dentist. He was on a home visit, and the newspapers had a story about this dentist who'd been caught smuggling diamonds, and my grandfather said to himself, "Well, if they caught him, they'll catch me." There was a ship in the harbor, and he took it. The point of all this wasn't about the diamonds, although that would come back to haunt me another time. It's about the fact that he had an ear for language. When I was 8 or 9 years old, growing up in Chicago, my father was starting a junk business. He had a horse and a wagon, which he rented, and he'd go up and down the alleys, and he'd be yelling, "Lex, Solaya, my wagon's broken, my horse is croaking." And the housewives would come out, they'd bring their bundles of newspaper and their bundles of old clothes and their beat up old kitchenware, no Teflon in those days. And the thing that struck me was that my father seemed to, at the age of 6 or 7, my age, I thought that my father could speak many languages, because these people who were ethnic, hyphenated Americans, many of them first generation, would speak to him in Greek or Russian or German or Polish or whatever it was, and he'd speak back to them. And then, as I got into my late single digits, I realized that he wasn't speaking a foreign language, he was mimicking their accent. I didn't know that I had this gift until I was asked to write a book with Leonard Goldenson, who was the founder of ABC. And how that came about is another story, and maybe you'll ask me about it. But the point is, this was an older man. He was in his 80s at the time, and he is a Harvard-educated lawyer who spoke in a slow, measured way, sort of like an early Obama, choosing his words very carefully with proper diction, and quite frankly, it was boring. And my challenge was to make the book sound like him but not be boring. And somehow I was able to pull that off. The next book I did as a collaboration where we were doing a first person, And by the way, I want to distinguish between two types of collaborations. One is where I'm doing all the work, and the other person is just telling me stories or handing me documents or whatever. And a kind of collaboration where you divide up the work. One person does research, for example, another person does the writing, and then the first person edits or makes commentary. And I've done both. My true crime books, 4 of my true crime books, which are anthologies, were done in that way. Catherine Mader, who is now a judge and was then a DA, deputy DA, did the research and I did the writing. But when it comes to collaborating with somebody on their life story, you have to try to sound like them, but better than them. You have to try to sound like they think they sound, or should sound. And the challenge, of course, is when you're working with someone who has a completely foreign language pattern. General Key, Win Kao Key, was the former Prime Minister of South Vietnam. I wrote a book with him about his wartime experiences called Buddha's Child. And his characteristics of his speech was quite dignified. The point is, I didn't have to do a lot of thinking about this. I just sat down at the keyboard and said, let me be Key's highest self, and I wrote. And it just sort of came out. I can't tell you how to do that. That's just what I do. The other part of the question is, how do you keep them from getting crazy? Well, you don't collaborate with somebody unless you are pretty sure that you can deal with them on an equal basis. And that has not always been my experience, but now that I know better, it will always be in the future, if there is a future for this in me. Legally, you need a signed agreement, and the best way to get a good, solid collaboration agreement is, if your agent doesn't have one, get an attorney. It's worth the money. And you have to specify who owns what, who does what, performs what part of the equation. And then you have to be prepared to do it all anyway.
And the attorneys, they have to be 2 separate attorneys in order to make that actually work. You can't have just one attorney.
You can have one attorney.
Well, it's better if you have 2.
I could only afford one.
I mean, you would only have one, and the other person would have their own. And that it's like a marriage.
As a conflict of interest.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you happen to solve a 50-year-old murder? That's a different kind of subject than murder.
Well, first of all, I was 52 years old at the time. My second book was a book called Fallen Angels, which is a history of LA crime from 1857, the Mexican-American War, up until 1986 is when the book came out. And one of the stories that we decided to write about was a story about the unsolved murder of Thelma Todd. It was a mystery, which at that time was not actually considered a murder. A coroner's jury, which we don't have anymore. We don't do the coroner's jury. It's actually a jury, and evidence is presented to them. They still do that in some parts of the country, but not here. A coroner's jury declared that this was death by unknown causes. They were not able to say whether it was murder or suicide or anything else. And my writing partner, Catherine Mader, Judge Mader, if you happen to go before a judge in the Century City courthouse, that might be her. She said, you know, I bet we could solve this. And I said, I don't think so. She said, no, I bet we could. And then just as I was getting ready to say, okay, let's find out, she got hired by the DA's office and wasn't able to do very much of the research, a little bit. But this turned out to be a blessing because I've learned a great deal. We have to understand that the internet is a young creature. It's only 21 years old. And anything that happened before 1995 is not likely to be on the internet. And anything that happened in 1935, the original documents will not be on the internet unless somebody went through the trouble of putting them on the internet. For the most part, they're not. On the other hand, there are a great number of places where you can find documents. So the first thing that we did, and Kathy was helpful in this, is we got that coroner's report from the coroner's office, and we got the minutes, the transcript of the coroner's jury. The next thing that I did is I wanted to find out if there was any other contemporaneous information. And it turns out that the USC library has a wonderful research facility besides the normal library that has lots and lots of stuff in it. They have a facility in a warehouse on the other side of the 110 freeway, and included in that archive is the entire morgue of the old Los Angeles Herald. And it's all on paper. So the good news is you tell the librarian what you're looking for, you give her a name or a couple of names or whatever, and she will find it for you if it's in the morgue. For those of you who don't know, a morgue is a newspaper clipping file service before there was the internet. It's all paper. And every newspaper, when I was working for newspapers in the 60s and 70s, had a morgue. And when someone died, my first newspaper job was writing obits. So if someone died, my first job was to go down to the morgue and say, do we have a file on so-and-so? And if the answer was no, there probably wouldn't be an obit, because the person was not well known. If the answer was yes, then they would bring me this file and I would have to go through it. So this is what I had to do for solving the Thelma Todd murder. And it was astonished to find out in looking at these newspaper clippings that everything that they said, all the testimony that was given at the coroner's jury is reported in the newspaper backwards. For example, there was an issue of scuffed slippers. Thelma Todd, before she died, had to walk up about 90 cement stairs to a garage where she was found dead behind the wheel of her car. The police came out, they found a policewoman. Why it had to be a policewoman is a whole other story. The same weight as Thelma Todd. They bought her a brand new pair of slippers and had her walk up those stairs. And then they compared the scuffing on the slippers. At the coroner's jury, they said that the scuffing was very, very similar. And their conclusion was that she had walked up those stairs. Now, she didn't have, operating from the fact that she was dead and found in a car, she didn't have to have walked up the stairs. She could have been in the car and driven there, or someone could have brought her there. But the police established that she had walked up by looking at the slippers. If you read the paper, it said her slippers were not scuffed at all. Well, that got me wondering why. And in time, I discovered that there was a strong friendship between William Randolph Hearst, who was the owner and publisher of the newspaper, and the motion picture industry, and particularly the heads of the studios. And eventually, I began to see that there had to have been a very elaborate cover-up. And then I went looking for people who might have been around in that time. And I started by interviewing librarians at the Motion Picture Academy, they have a library, big library there, at the Hollywood Reporter and so forth. And I was directed to a gentleman named Hal Roach. Who remembers Hal Roach? King of comedy. Well, Thelma Todd was under contract to him. And his studio, Hal Roach Studios, was on the lot of MGM, and all of his financing and distribution came through MGM. Because in those days, he was doing two-reelers, short comic shorts, Laurel and Hardy, Pitts and Todd, and others. So two or three people said to me, go find Hal Roach. He's still alive. He might talk to you. So I found Hal Roach, and for 6 months we played footsie on the phone. Oh, I'm not feeling well. Oh, I'm going out of town. Oh, I'm having guests in. Eventually I cornered him, and I went up there with Kathy Mader. I never said to him what I wanted to talk about. I just said I was a reporter. I was working on a book, which was not quite true. We didn't do a book on that. So we went up to his home in Stone Canyon. He was 95 years old. He really went for the young chicks. His girlfriend was only 70. And he welcomes us into his study, on the walls of which was an impossible number of celebrity pictures. He began in 1912 as a horseman, an extra in an Oder, a cowboy movie, silent movie. And he asked us to sit down, and he had his maid bring us tea. And then he said, you're here because of Thelma Todd. He told us. He said, I'll tell you about Thelma Todd. And he told me all about it, told both of us about it. We didn't have to ask him very many questions. He gave us her whole life story up to the time that she was killed, from the time she got to Hollywood until the time she was killed. And she told us who killed him and why. And it turned out he was the last living member of the cover-up. And he told us, this is all he told us about the cover-up. 4 days after her body was found, he was in his office, and 3 sheriff detectives wearing big hats came to his office and said, Thelma Todd has been murdered, and Roland West did it. What do you think we should do about that? What do you think we should do about that? And he said, oh, nothing, I guess. He'll get the best lawyers and he'll get off. So why make a scandal? How's our 30 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay. We have to interrupt the filming at 30-minute intervals so that he can turn it off and turn it on. So they said, yeah, that's what we thought, and they left. So this left me with more questions than I could possibly answer. Why, first of all, would they ask him that? And secondly, why would the sheriff's office be investigating what was an LAPD case? Well, it turns out that the sheriff's office has the authority to take a case from the city because the county is a higher level of state government. Why would they ask him that? So I poked around in the files at USC's, not the morgue, but they have an enormous amount of documents there. And I discovered that Nicholas Skank, who was the head of MGM, was the younger brother of Joseph Skank, who was the head of 20th Century Fox. And Joseph Skank was the most powerful man in the movie business. He was the founder of the Motion Picture Association of America, which continues to this day. He was the first president. He was basically a president for as long as he was alive. He was the largest property owner in the state of California. He was vice chairman of the California Republican Party. He could have been the chairman, but that took a lot of work. So that made me think, okay, so the fix was in, but why would he do that? And then I discovered that his best friend was Roland West, the man who killed her. Now the last question was, why would the sheriffs do this? So I did a little more poking around, and I found that Sheriff Eugene Biscaloos, who was sheriff here for 32 years, longer than anybody's ever been, probably longer than anybody will be again, had been the undersheriff, and 4 years before this had run against the incumbent sheriff and lost. Thereupon, the state highway commissioner got the state assembly to fund a highway patrol. There had not been a highway patrol, And Biscaluz was appointed the commander of the Highway Patrol. 4 years later, he ran against the incumbent sheriff and won. Well, who was the highway commissioner? Joe Skegg was the highway commissioner, and the vice chairman of the Republican Party of the state of California, and the head of MGM. I'm sorry, and the head of 20th Century Fox, and the best friend of Roland West. And that explains how all of these things were covered up. And there's nobody in the business better than telling a story than the Hollywood people. So they created a false story. They had people come up and perjure themselves in front of the jury. And that's how they solved the murder.
What year was that again?
What year was that?
What year was the murder?
Yeah.
1936.
And how old was Thelma when she was killed?
How old was Thelma when she was killed?
36.
What happened to Roland West?
What happened to Roland West?
Roland West became a zombie. He became a man who couldn't get a job. He produced and directed, he was a director, a number of films under other names. But no, his penance was that nobody would hire him under his own name. And he is kind of, if this had not happened, you would know who Roland West was, because he was the guy who invented a number of genres, film genres. The suspense genre, that was Roland West's contribution.
All right.
Let's take a little break right
Okay,
here.
we'll take a break.
About 1 minute left.
We shut it off and start it
That's
again,
it.
please. I'm going to stretch.
Yeah, because it's still on.
Anybody who wants to stretch?